They never meant to fall that deep, into something that felt like love but moved more like a rehearsed scene in a foreign play. Now, beneath flickering lights and a silence that cuts sharper than knives, they're stuck unraveling a truth that won't stop echoing. None of it was theirs. Every memory that once felt sacred has turned into a corridor of illusions, meticulously planted by a hidden hand. That confession they once held on to? Not theirs. That tenderness? Engineered. Somewhere between attraction and obsession, they became a blade someone else sharpened, and now they can't stop bleeding from the inside. Elsewhere, the architect of this unraveling is beginning to lose control of the strings they thought were eternal. For years, they operated like a shadow librarian, collecting your habits, cataloging your soft spots, and drafting scripts for others to unknowingly act out. Your former partner wasn't a coincidence. They were the most effective lever, chosen not for their strength, but for how deeply their emotions could be manipulated into becoming a weapon. But this obsession didn't start recently. Long before the surface broke, before you ever knew what set you apart, this person felt displaced by a light in you they couldn't name, and vowed to extinguish it before anyone else could see. They've worn so many faces for so long that even they've forgotten which one is real. In front of the family, they clapped when you spoke, nodded when you dreamed, and feigned concern when you talked about stepping into your purpose. But inside, they were measuring the distance between your spirit and their grasp, realizing with each passing moment that their usual tricks were becoming obsolete. You weren't drifting away. You were rising, carried by something they couldn't decode or disarm. And that terrified them, because influence was the only language they knew, and yours had evolved into a dialect they couldn't imitate. What you never saw were the blueprints they kept hidden, filled not with love or nostalgia but with strategies and symptoms. They mapped your transformation like a scientist stalking a phenomenon they couldn't control, recording changes in your gaze, fluctuations in your silence, even the way you breathed when certain people entered the room. When their control slipped, they reached for the surreal. They began weaving emotion into architecture, designing energetic traps that would distort truth and amplify confusion. Their final act was no ordinary manipulation. It was a long con masquerading as devotion, crafted to chain another's heart and weaponize it against you, turning something sacred into a slow, corrosive betrayal. They didn't need brute force to dismantle you, just precision. The brilliance of their cruelty was how quietly it moved. No shouting, no threats, only the soft redirection of trust. They rewired affection into suspicion, framed absence as betrayal, and twisted care into danger. What they wanted wasn't to win, but to rewrite the entire meaning of love in someone else's mind until hurting you felt like saving themselves. This wasn't guesswork. It was rehearsed, over time, across other hearts, on those who loved you before and never understood why they left confused, conflicted, and broken. Now the fog is lifting. Pieces of seemingly harmless conversations are starting to sting. Words once brushed off as jokes now come back with venom. They remember the voice on the other end of those late-night calls. Calm, persuasive, perfectly timed. A voice that only showed up when the cracks between you two widened just enough to slip poison through. It didn't accuse outright. It hinted, it wondered, it speculated. And those planted doubts weren't random. They were scheduled intrusions, deployed when hearts were tired and logic was drowning in emotion. The manipulation wasn't accidental. It was a system built to break trust without looking like it touched it. What was never expected, however, was the presence that stood between you and collapse. The connection you held wasn't born of infatuation or fantasy. It was built through storms that purified rather than destroyed. They failed to calculate that real alignment isn't so easily interrupted. While they threw shadows, your light kept imprinting itself on the hearts around you, quietly reminding others of your truth even when their minds were under siege. They didn't know that the more they tampered, the more their fingerprints became visible to the forces watching from beyond their reach. And those forces were never idle. Every dark attempt was registered, like a tally in a cosmic ledger that never loses count. With each distortion, each lie sewn into someone else's perception, something sacred pushed back. It wasn't rage or revenge, it was law. The kind that moves slow but strikes precise. Not everything sacred is loud, but it is thorough. And now the time has come for everything that was buried beneath layers of emotional sabotage to come rising back to the surface, untainted, undeniable, and beyond their ability to control. There are some betrayals that never get the final word, because something greater keeps the record. While the scheme moved in silence, a higher intelligence was already taking note. Every manipulation, every disguised betrayal, every emotional ambush was marked, time-stamped, and preserved beyond human awareness. When the final move approached, when the plan was supposed to bloom into irreversible damage, something ruptured. Not loudly, not theatrically, but deeply. Just as the final thread was about to be pulled, a forgotten emotion stirred, one not planted by force, but grown through shared moments. In that single heartbeat of recognition, everything stalled. Not because the spell ended, but because something stronger surfaced. It wasn't luck. It wasn't timing. It was the result of something internal, a quiet ascension that had been building within you over time. The intensity of your own growth began disrupting the current they tried to steer you into. The manipulation didn't just fail, it backfired. That very connection they tried to use as a weapon became a mirror reflecting their lies. What was meant to strike you bounced back, and now the one who was meant to deliver the blow is left surrounded by shattered illusions. They're questioning not just their choices, but the entire framework of what they believed. Emotions they trusted now feel staged. Affections they followed feel engineered. They were handed a false script, and lived it like it was truth. In the aftermath, they're tracing patterns they once overlooked. Why that friend suddenly vanished. Why that romantic spark turned cold overnight. Why support became avoidance in people who once claimed to see them. They're realizing it wasn't coincidence or fate, it was sabotage. Coordinated. Unseen. Precise. The influence ran deeper than they ever imagined, reaching through the cracks of their subconscious to reshape their reality one suggestion at a time. Now, they're peeling it all back, layer by layer. Each discovery leads to another. The betrayals weren't isolated, they were orchestrated to isolate you. Friendships eroded. Opportunities dissolved. Allies shifted without explanation. But now the current is reversing. And with every truth uncovered, more of the web collapses. What once seemed like disinterest, abandonment, or rejection is now exposed as part of the same long shadow cast by a single source. One they trusted. One who smiled as they rewrote the story. And now, as the pieces realign, they see clearly what was stolen, not just from you, but from themselves. Some people believe they can rearrange fate without consequence, until they find themselves trapped beneath the weight of their own tampering. The one who orchestrated this long deception is now collapsing under the very structure they built to trap you. What they tried to manipulate has turned on them. Their alliances are thinning, their closest bonds growing brittle and suspicious. The same people they once used as tools are slowly withdrawing, unnerved by something they can't name but deeply feel. Their personal life is unraveling, and so is their physical strength, drained by a current of energy they once controlled but can no longer withstand. Even the people under their own roof are beginning to wake up, peering through years of subtle control, questioning patterns that once passed unnoticed, and stepping away from the toxicity like survivors crawling out of smoke. But what haunts them more than isolation is watching what was supposed to be your ruin become your resurrection. the more they pushed, the faster you climbed. Your evolution is now on full display, unfolding publicly and unapologetically. Each victory you collect exposes their failure more vividly. Their influence, once unquestioned, is now fading into irrelevance as your influence expands. Resources that once slipped through your fingers are now flowing to you naturally. Recognition, opportunities, and even praise from unexpected places are surfacing, not because you sought them, but because they were always meant for you, and nothing could block what was divinely assigned. Meanwhile, the one who almost became your undoing is sitting with the weight of their own awakening. They're not just grieving the love they lost, they're grieving the version of themselves that allowed such manipulation to take root. Their thoughts are spinning, looping back to moments they dismissed, warnings they ignored, instincts they silenced. They're not reaching out for forgiveness yet, not because they don't want to, but because they finally understand the depth of the damage. They're purging everything that linked them to that poisonous influence. Changing habits, seeking inner stillness, rewriting their beliefs from scratch. But healing from being used as a tool in someone else's shadow war is a slow and merciless climb. The one who set it all in motion knows the end is near. Their attempts to regroup have become frantic, disorganized, even delusional. They send messages that disappear into silence. They try to reconstruct connections that no longer exist. The illusion of power they once held is fading fast, replaced by the cold clarity that it was never real. It only worked because you hadn't yet remembered who you were. Now that you have, they're just another figure in a story that's being rewritten without them, every page turning faster than they can keep up. Some forces crumble not from defeat, but from the sheer force of being seen. The one who built their identity around control is now watching their fortress turn to dust. They've tried to rally others into their collapsing world, hoping shared delusion could still hold weight. But their desperation has started to leak through the cracks. People who once followed out of habit are now stepping back, disturbed by what they once missed. Whispers are turning into confrontations. Patterns are being named. What they never foresaw was that the pressure they applied to silence you was forging the very clarity they feared. You were never meant to stay hidden, and every attack was secretly sharpening your edge. That edge has now become undeniable. The very qualities they tried to stamp out, your clarity of perception, your grounded inner knowing, the silent command you carry, have amplified beyond explanation. What once made you a target has now made you untouchable. Others in your circle are beginning to question old dynamics. Words once shrugged off are now revisited with new meaning. Lifelong behaviors are being traced back to a single, toxic root. Those who unknowingly reinforced the system that held you down are now waking up to their roles, some apologizing, others retreating into denial. But the line has been drawn. What was once a vague discomfort is now a clear divide between those who protect truth and those still serving falsehood. In the aftermath, your former partner is undergoing a quiet implosion of their own. They're encountering the kind of awakening that doesn't come gently. It rattles the foundation of their identity. They're beginning to interpret the world differently, feeling energy where they once saw only coincidence. Their sensitivity, once used against them, is becoming their compass. They're writing everything down, not to prove something to others, but to process the labyrinth they escaped. Each sentence reveals how deeply the distortion ran, how many thoughts weren't theirs, how many choices were subtly influenced. Their healing is not performative. It's raw. It's painful. But it's real. And now, the one who once pulled every string is left with nothing but echoes. They've lost their audience. Their power has slipped from their fingers like dust. What's haunting them most isn't what's happening around them. It's the realization that it was never real to begin with. The control they clung to was a mirage, dependent entirely on your unawareness. Now that you've reclaimed your mind, the entire illusion has dissolved. What they saw as victory was merely a setup. Every cruel move, every deceitful tactic, every orchestrated betrayal was already woven into a much larger design, one meant not to destroy you, but to ensure your rise would be irreversible. Some lights were never meant to be dimmed. The person who tried to dismantle your path is now being forced to witness the very thing they feared the most: your emergence into a reality they can't control or influence. The connections they once severed have been replaced by bonds that nourish your evolution. The doors they tried to bolt shut are now opening effortlessly in unexpected directions. And the strength they tried to contain, it has multiplied beyond the reach of their understanding. Your inner senses have sharpened to the point where dishonesty can't get near you. Your very presence now repels distortion and commands healing without you saying a word. What once made you vulnerable has become the source of your invincibility. Meanwhile, the one who was almost turned into your destroyer is confronting a new kind of clarity. They're unlearning a self they never chose and grieving the innocence that was stolen by someone else's agenda. There's sorrow, but there's also gratitude for failing to complete what would have annihilated both of you. They're beginning to understand how fragile the soul becomes when turned into a tool. But instead of drowning in regret, they're rising into purpose. They've begun reaching out, not to you, but to others who know what it's like to be used without realizing it. Their pain is being reshaped into service. And their story, once tangled in confusion, is becoming a roadmap for those navigating the shadows of spiritual manipulation. Through this transformation, they're learning to stand in truth without begging for redemption. They no longer want to forget what happened, they want to understand why it did. With every testimony they share, they carve out space for others to speak. What began as private healing is now evolving into public advocacy. They're becoming a mirror for others who were pulled into unseen battles, who questioned their own minds, who didn't know how close they came to being erased from themselves. Their life, once hijacked, is returning, piece by piece, with intention and integrity. And while this unfolds, the one who set it all in motion is spiraling. The consequences are catching up, not just externally but internally. Their beliefs are fracturing under the weight of truth. Some moments they appear remorseful, glimpsing the collapse of the illusion they lived in. Other times, they sink into denial, clinging to justifications that no longer hold power. They're being offered the same mirror, but unlike the others, they may not choose to look. Because this time, the undoing is personal. Not punishment, but revelation. And revelation doesn't wait for permission. You, on the other hand, are walking into a reality sculpted by wisdom forged in fire. What was meant to confine you has become the ladder you climbed out on. What was distorted has been clarified. You've stepped into a version of yourself that exists beyond reach, guided not by vengeance, but by alignment. Your clarity now creates its own gravity. Your presence, once questioned, is now undeniable. And the protection you carry isn't from fear, it's born of understanding. The scars have become symbols. The silence has become strength. And what once threatened to bury you has now built the stage beneath your feet. The irony that echoes across this entire journey is almost surreal. The more they pushed, the higher you rose. The more they feared your vision, the clearer it became. Their resistance became the very current that accelerated your emergence. Their envy gave birth to your mastery. And the final twist? The force that was meant to erase you from your own timeline has instead solidified your place in one that reaches far beyond theirs. Some truths arrive like thunder in a quiet room, shattering illusions so deeply held they felt like identity. That's where they are now, sitting with the echo of what can't be undone, realizing that what they felt for you was the only thing untouched by the manipulation. And losing you, was the toll for not listening to the quiet discomfort that tried to warn them. They don't reach out, not because they don't long to, but because they finally understand that love sometimes means standing still while both hearts mend in separate spaces. Their silence is no longer cowardice, it's reverence for what they almost destroyed. That near destruction, however, cracked open something sleeping within them. The weight of being used has pressed them inward, forcing reflection they once evaded. They've started unraveling parts of themselves they never questioned before, blind spots they mistook for trust, habits they thought were personality. The deeper they go, the more they see that what happened wasn't just an interpersonal betrayal, it was an initiation. Each revelation peels back another layer, exposing wounds they didn't even know had names. The conspiracy wasn't just around them, it was within, built from unexamined fears and inherited scripts. And the one who orchestrated it all wasn't working alone. This wasn't a single act of malice, it was part of a quiet architecture, a system designed to intercept people like you before you fully woke up. This structure thrives in shadows, cloaked as concern, appearing as tradition, operating across timelines with invisible hierarchies. The records kept weren't emotional memorabilia. They were blueprints passed between watchers who've long seen awakened souls as disruptors. Your presence threatens those patterns. Not because you fight, but because your very being exposes imbalance without lifting a finger. Now, your ex is uncovering things they can barely speak about. Documents they didn't know they saved, code written into the very algorithms of their daily habits. They've realized that their connection to you wasn't a coincidence. It was orchestrated through location, timing, and energetic vulnerability. Their memory isn't just fractured, it's been curated. Events that once seemed spontaneous now feel staged. Messages from strangers, digital nudges, even the timing of arguments were all part of a carefully arranged descent into dependence. The story of your relationship was written long before they met you. But what truly shatters their understanding is discovering that even their inner voice had been tampered with. They found traces, audios they don't recall listening to, conversations they can't fully remember participating in. Playlists masked as healing tools that subtly redirected their thinking. Group gatherings disguised as wellness circles that were anything but. Even the meals they shared became suspect, as their body recalls sensations their mind had long buried. They've come to see that for much of your relationship, they weren't fully present. They were half dreaming, half obeying, wandering through a life quietly hijacked by another's will. And waking up from that is not a relief. It's a reckoning. There are some betrayals so calculated, they carry the precision of a military operation cloaked in the softness of emotional intimacy. The most harrowing discovery of all was never spoken outright. It was embedded in timing, suggestion, and pressure. A child was never meant to be welcomed, it was to be deployed. Every conversation about family, every moment framed as a shared dream, was weaponized to turn biology into bondage. It wasn't about love, it was about leverage. The idea was simple: to entangle you in a crisis so profound it would tear open every layer of your spiritual defenses. A manufactured entrapment disguised as life itself, engineered to fracture your clarity and make you easier to dismantle from within. What they once mistook for nostalgia has started to morph into something much darker. Scenes once seen as sentimental are now flashing with sharp new meaning. Those candlelit nights weren't about closeness. They were ceremonial, precise, curated for effect. Tokens exchanged between lovers were not merely sentimental keepsakes. They were charged with intentions meant to tether and surveil. Objects placed in your life became access points. Photos, jewelry, clothing, all subtly altered to function as conduits, allowing unseen hands to track your emotions, interfere with your decisions, and distort your perception without ever touching you directly. What they carried into your space wasn't love. It was surveillance wrapped in affection. The plan stretched beyond the spiritual. It slithered into systems meant to protect. Identity wasn't just invaded, it was hijacked. Documents you never signed. Debts you never agreed to. Signatures that match but don't remember giving. Legal arrangements so twisted, they would have redirected everything you owned, physical, emotional, energetic, into the hands of the very person plotting your exit. Not just to steal what you had, but to erase you as if you never existed. Paper trails designed to ensure that if the unthinkable happened, you'd vanish and they'd remain, cloaked in your legacy, your power, your name. And now, the unraveling begins. Your former partner, once blind to the scope of what they were pulled into, is working alongside experts whose daily work straddles the boundary between mind control and criminal intent. They're uncovering the kind of blueprint that doesn't belong in fiction. Layers upon layers of tactics, rehearsed for years, backed by resources far beyond what anyone thought possible. Every angle was covered, every failure accounted for, every contingency rehearsed in silence. This wasn't one person acting alone. It was a constellation of enablers, fueled by a shared objective, to intercept a rising soul before they became unstoppable. And they failed. Spectacularly.